Hundreds killed, over 1 million displaced, and yet another humanitarian crisis looming. As Israeli ground troops push further into Lebanese territory, European leaders warn starkly against the offensive. But what are Israel's actual goals? And will Lebanon be able to maintain unity in the face of this crisis? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is Lebanon. Via multiple attempts over decades, Israel has deployed ground troops vowing to eliminate Hezbollah in Lebanon. And on Monday, another attempt was launched, leading to more deaths, destruction, and a massive displacement of civilians. Now, time and time again, Hezbollah has survived. But in the context of the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran, could a weakened benefactor, along with a government in Beirut pushing for Hezbollah to disarm, change the equation? Or will Hezbollah potentially regain support for being the only force to stand up to Israel? Here's a look.
Israel's military says it's begun a targeted ground operation in southern Lebanon. The Israeli army releasing a video showing its troops inside southern Lebanon attacking what they say are Hezbollah strongholds. Smoke was seen rising from the Lebanese town of Taiber, close to the Israeli border on Tuesday. Lebanon's capital, Beirut, was also targeted by fresh missile strikes in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Israel has framed its offensive in Lebanon as a defensive move to protect northern Israel from Hezbollah attacks in the days after the US-Israel war was launched against Iran. Lebanon was pulled into the conflict 2 weeks ago when Hezbollah launched rockets and drones at Israel in retaliation for the killing of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. On the conflict's third day, the Israeli army issued a blanket evacuation order to all Lebanese residents across swathes of Lebanon south of the Litani River, displacing hundreds of thousands of Lebanese citizens. Families shelter at this school.
Of course, I was displaced. My house was damaged. The situation is difficult, of course. I mean, I can't describe to you the feeling that we're experiencing, but it's hard, very hard. It's hard to leave your home, hard to leave your land.
The situation is as you can see. We are two families here, 11 people in the tent, sleeping crowded together here, 11 people, and I have a small child. And as you can see, sometimes we wash in a basin here.
On Monday, the Lebanese government said the number of displaced people now exceeded 1 million.
So joining me now for further analysis and to debate Israel's latest moves into Lebanon are, from Beirut, retired Lebanese Armed Forces general and lecturing university professor in geopolitics, Khalil Helou. From Staten Island, senior foreign policy writer at Newsweek magazine, Tom O'Connor. And from Boston, public policy fellow at American University of Beirut, Rami Khouri. Thank you all so much for being with me. General Helou, just as it looked like Lebanon could be seeing the demilitarization of Hezbollah after the government called for it to disarm, here is Lebanon facing another Israeli ground invasion. If you cast your mind back even to 2 months ago, would you have expected things to unfold the way they have?
Yes, it was not difficult to predict what is going on now for very simple reasons. The first one is the multiple warnings that the Lebanese government and the Lebanese president got from all American emissaries and European emissaries that if Hezbollah is not going to disarm, Israel is going to do the job. The message was as such. It was not camouflaged or concealed. It was very clear. And the problem is, first regarding Lebanon, that Israel has permanently violated the Lebanese airspace all over the past years. Hezbollah refused to disarm. These two moves are a violation of the ceasefire that has been agreed on November 27, 2024. Therefore, the Lebanese government should have been proactive on that issue. This government is in charge since 1 year, 30 months, since 13 months or 14 months. The new president has been elected in past January, so he is here since 14 months also. And the government and the executive did nothing till past August. And when they took the decision, the implementation of the disarmament of Hezbollah was very slow. And of course, everyone now is blaming the Lebanese army. I don't blame the Lebanese army at all, because this implementation, this slow implementation, is the result of a political problem, because Hezbollah is in the government and Hezbollah is in the parliament. The Lebanese army follows the order of the government. The government was not united on this decision.
Okay.
And any move that the Lebanese armed forces could undertake by force on the ground will have political repercussions, because on the opposite, as other terrorist organizations like ISIS or Al-Qaeda, they were rejected by the Sunni population of Lebanon, whereas Hezbollah is welcomed by the majority of the Shia in Lebanon. So we are not dealing here with a pure military problem. We are dealing with a very complicated situation where the government was not doing the correct job. The government was not securing the mission of the army politically, and it should have behaved in another way at all.
Okay. Rami, I need to get your thoughts on that analysis. I mean, how much do you really feel the government is to blame for its perceived failures here? And Hezbollah is to blame, in part, for not disarming, not following the order that was there. What do you make of Hezbollah's role and its accountability?
Yeah, I think what the general said is generally quite accurate. I think people will debate these points one by one, but overall he's right. It's hard to just take Hezbollah and the Lebanese government, or Hezbollah and the armed forces in Lebanon alone. Lebanon has been dealing with about a dozen major actors in the country and in the region and in the world over the last 75 years or so. It has never been able to fully establish its own sovereignty. It's always been, like most Arab countries, it's always been intruded upon by, Syria, Palestinian groups, Saudi Arabia, Iran, the United States, France, Israel. There's many, many actors who have come into Lebanon to try to influence it or control it. And so you have to really spread the blanket of blame very wide on many people. And fundamentally, what we're dealing with is the delayed but ongoing aftershocks of a colonial system that in the 1920s and 30s and 40s tried to create a Middle East of new states. And the system always, in the Western eyes, gave priority to the Israelis. And this is what we're seeing. And Israel is now trying to expand its zone of control into Iran and other places. So I think we don't get very far by just trying to blame one side or the other. Lebanese people are extraordinary. I spent half my life in Lebanon. And it's hard to find a population as talented and skilled, productive, creative as the Lebanese, but also plagued with poor political leadership, erratic leadership in the country, and constant intervention from overseas. And this is the sixth time since 1968, sixth major time that the Israelis come in with their army, and they're doing exactly the same thing. They're trying to take over Khiam, the strategic spot in southeast Lebanon, as the first target. So it's really.
Let me get Tom's opinion on that then, because we've heard a little bit of the background and what led up to Israel's latest ground force invasion. But if we look at the here and now, do you think in the current circumstances that the conditions are any harder for Hezbollah now, to the point that the equation may finally change, the balance of power might really tip against Hezbollah in Lebanon?
Well, certainly, I think there are lessons, but there are limits to those lessons that we can draw from the past experiences of conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. Because as you have mentioned, the context is just very different this time. Iran is under direct fire. Hezbollah has suffered devastating blows to command and control as well as its stockpile. But we have to remember that since this entire conflict began in October 2023, even Hamas in Gaza has not been entirely defeated. Yes, they've been routed. Yes, they've been beat back in certain instances. So, I think we're also seeing, speaking of limits, as to what can be done from the air. I think Hezbollah in some ways is far more comfortable fighting a ground war than having to deal with drone strikes, airstrikes, relentless intelligence coups. So I think that certainly the conditions are more difficult for Hezbollah right now, not only because of the military equation, but also the social equation in Lebanon. Hezbollah does have a significant amount of blowback, especially for its decision to enter the war in the first place and then to once again intervene. It does have still a significant support base, which continues to allow it to exist in the form it does and will continue no matter what happens in terms of there being that support there for the resistance factions. But it is under pressure from all sides. And I think there's a lot of eyes on the Lebanese government, the Lebanese armed forces, as to what they can do. But there's also a question of who will support them. Are the Lebanese armed forces themselves able to take on Hezbollah without, of course, significantly tearing at the fabric of Lebanese society, which, as we know, is already subject to a very precarious and fragile power-sharing system? Is there an alternative for that at the ready that doesn't risk plunging into another really devastating internal conflict? And I think that's really the fear right now.
Yeah. So let me ask General Helou about that, about the internal conditions. You now have hundreds of thousands of internal refugees that, let's just say, other parts of Lebanon don't necessarily want to host. So what is happening to them, and how much domestic tension is it causing? Are there true fears now of another civil conflict fomenting within Lebanon?
Yes. Now, these people who have been displaced into areas where initially Hezbollah is considered as hostile, considered as an adversary. These people are supportive to Hezbollah. They have been welcomed in social centers. There is no problem with that. The government with it, with good order, to create social tension. At least a huge part of them will not be able to return back to their villages because their villages are either destroyed or Israel is occupying these villages. So they will stay where they are. There is no other place to go. You initially, or during the past wars, this is the 5th Hezbollah-Israel war, by the way. And usually, part of them was fleeing to Syria. And now they are unable to do that because the Syrian army, the current Syrian army of the new regime, has closed the border and is very restrictive about that. So on the long run, if there is no solution or settlement, or I don't know how this war will end, it is linked, of course, with the Iranian-US-Israeli war. And I think that now, for the time being, what Israel is doing now is an incursion in South Lebanon, and there is a possibility that it invades because what we are hearing is that they are calling the reserves.
Okay.
And when you call the reserves at times like this, it means that it is for the Lebanese front, not for any other.
Fair enough. General Helou, I need to apologize to our viewers and other panelists for the sound quality on your line there. We got most of what you said, so let me have Rami follow up on that. Your analysis of the current internal condition of Lebanon and the potential for more civil conflict, how will the Shia people have to be received if Israel keeps pushing further into particularly the southeast? What's set to happen? Are the conditions truly a tinderbox of sorts?
Well, they've been a tinderbox for many, many years, and Lebanon had its civil war. It's not going to have another one. They realize it didn't solve anything. And there's always tensions, and the system is constantly on edge. And economically, of course, it's a terrible situation. But there are some new factors. You have a very decisive government leadership now with the prime minister and the president, much more decisive than we've ever had in recent decades. And they've taken the step of the government said that military action by Hezbollah is outlawed. So that's pretty significant. The other factor is that Hezbollah was weakened, but it's still obviously very active. And then you have a third really significant factor, which is that the Nabih Berri, the head of the second major Shiite group, the Speaker of Parliament, voted with the government to make that decision that action by Hezbollah is outlawed. So that's quite significant. There's tension there within the Shiite community, but it's not all just Shiites. There's a lot of people in the south that were not Shiites, and they've been displaced too. And communities all over the country have been attacked but the Shiites are the main supporters of Hezbollah, and there's many other people in Lebanon who support Hezbollah if it defends Lebanon from Israeli attacks, which it has in the past. It had, helped push the Israelis out of Lebanon in the early 2000s, but it doesn't last very long because the power of Israel is backed by the U.S. militarily. They feel they can do anything they want, and they're coming in for another ground invasion. They may stay in the south for a few years, but they're trying to do in Lebanon now what they did in Gaza, which is just order people around, displace huge numbers. About a third of the Lebanese population has been displaced, but this doesn't bring them any closer. The Israelis are very powerful militarily, but very simple-minded politically. They don't understand how to use their power to achieve legitimate political goals that serve both sides equally. They don't know how to do that. They want to be dominant. They want their priorities to prevail, and this is why they're at war now with 5 or 6 people all around the Middle East.
Let me ask Tom about that. I mean, could that arguably sloppy execution of this neighboring military power that is Israel actually change the equation again by, in a sense, alienating enough of the Shia population to build again that resentment, that cycle of revenge, and then actual support for a force that fights this aggressive power that goes in with something less than a strategy and this disdain almost for diplomacy?
I think this really speaks to some of the contradictions that we've seen over the past 2.5 years since the war in Gaza began, which is just, the overwhelming military might on one side, and also this, this support base for some of these movements, first, Hamas and then Hezbollah, and then perhaps even we'll see what's going on with Iran, Yemen as well. It's difficult to just use pure military might, and even most Israeli, officials and military officials will admit this. That's why they want to see action on the ground from the Lebanese actors. From the U.S. side, they don't want to put boots on the ground. They want either the Lebanese to do it, and then if not, the Israelis to do it. But there doesn't seem to be yet a conceivable day after plan. And I think that, yes, it certainly runs the risk of Israel portraying itself as an invading actor, with obviously, the caveat that there are many people in Lebanon who do think that Hezbollah's actions were ill-conceived and do feel that there needs to be a change in the current situation. Do they want to see that change come in the form of massive airstrikes, invasions, not just as was mentioned in southern Lebanon, but in Beirut and other parts of the country? I think, that's a case-by-case basis. It's up to the Lebanese people to decide, but I worry that they're not the largest stakeholder, or I should say, in terms of decision maker in this process. I mean, these things are being made outside of their capabilities. Israel right now very much wants to seize on this moment. They want to move forward with this. I mean, I just spoke to Israeli military officials about an hour or 2 hours ago, and they're not willing to commit to a final end for Hezbollah in this particular operation, but they are talking every time I speak to them about a bigger picture, a paradigm shift, and that is ultimately the goal.
Right. Let's talk a little bit more about that, Tom, because the question here that we actually posed at the top of the show is, what does Israel really want for the longer term? It's not necessarily just about Israeli border security, and there could be these goals to potentially annex or fully occupy southern Lebanon as part of this greater vision that's been mentioned more than a few times now to secure a greater Israel. Where do you see the larger long-term strategy being, especially given the more extremist elements that are in power now in the Israeli Knesset?
Well, I think it's certainly concerning that, especially given the current political context in Israel, any land that is, taken, that is occupied, is very unlikely to be given back, at least in the short term. Now, obviously, there's differences between the outlooks on the West Bank and Gaza, the outlooks in the Golan Heights, and now further land in Syria, and the outlooks on southern Lebanon. These are all different cases, but certainly, if there is a prolonged major Israeli military incursion into Lebanon, I think that we should expect a long-term Israeli presence there. As to the final goal, we hear from Israeli officials that they believe that there can be a new relationship with Lebanon, that if it's broken out of the Iranian axis, the Israeli point of view. But again, the damage done to the public psyche in Lebanon based on these Israeli attacks, I think is a very significant factor. Whether that's being, efficiently or sufficiently prepared for in these long-term plans, if there are long-term plans that really speak to that, I think is still really an open question. And of course, whether the White House also appreciates that is an open question.
Yeah. Let me get General Helou's thoughts on what was just said there. General, I think you're back online. If you could hear that exchange, please do go ahead with your comments.
Yes. Now, my comment is the following. If the real Israeli goal is to secure the northern Israel, I think that the operation will be limited. The operation now currently underway in the eastern part of the border. This is the place where the Litani River is very close to the border, less than 5 kilometers. On the contrary, in the western part, it is at 30 kilometers. So securing northern Israel, as they claim, we would see this limited operation, maybe that will last for several weeks. But if the real goal is to disarm Hezbollah, as they are saying, first of all, it is a very hard mission. It's a very difficult, and it will be a disaster for Lebanon. It is already a disaster, but if they invade and go further to the northern Bekaa, I am wondering, first of all, if they will succeed, first of all. Second, they will need to involve more than 100,000 troops all over Lebanon and search each village. This is unrealistic. So, if we only look to this problem from that angle, it is very simplistic. We have to see what is the outcome of the war between Iran and US, Iran and Israel.
Okay.
And let me stress on one point, major point. Weakening Iran will mean, of course, more and more weakening of Hezbollah. But the opposite is true. Weakening Hezbollah or degrading the Hezbollah force is a huge blow to Iran also. So we have to take all these elements into account when we approach this situation.
Quickly, though, General, I mean, there's another issue to that. We're only speaking about this in terms of Hezbollah, but some will argue that Israeli action in this context, and as it was described as, lacking strategy, going full force rather than looking at diplomatic actions at all, could actually be building the cycle of, revenge that leads to even stronger resistance in the formation of potentially other armed groups, be them paramilitary or extremist or anything else. Do you fear that in the context of Lebanon? What could be building under the surface?
Now, in the context of Lebanon, if Israel occupies South Lebanon and stops there, Hezbollah will have a very strong argument in order not to disarm, in order to get back to the rhetoric of resistance. It will be a huge problem for the Lebanese government. And I think that we will go back 20 years ago to 2006. But let us also look at this from another angle. The Syrian regime that was the land bridge between Hezbollah and Iran doesn't exist anymore. So Hezbollah, after each ceasefire, was rearming from Iran through Syria, through Damascus airport, Aleppo airport, and then funneling all this weaponry and these ammunitions to Lebanon. Today, this is absolutely not on the table. So whatever is the outcome of this war, Hezbollah will be weakened, but will not disappear. And the seeds of more extremist organization are not realistic. Hezbollah is extremely rooted within the Shia population since 40 years.
Let me ask Rami your opinion on that. Do you genuinely feel that any kind of more extreme or more militant options are only in the hands of Hezbollah in the context of Lebanon?
I wouldn't use words like extreme and militant mainly to describe Hezbollah. I would talk about groups that legitimately emerge from popular discontent and occupation and subjugation. Foreign, people all over the Middle East, Lebanon, Palestine, Iran, they all have to live with governments of various levels of quality. Some are tyrannical, some are just mediocre, some are corrupt, some are good. But the thing that all the people in the region hate more than the internal problems they have is foreign military intervention and people from abroad bossing them around. So if Hezbollah is, let's say, defeated or controlled or whatever, which is the majority view in Lebanon now, they want Hezbollah to not be a separate militant group by itself. But it does reflect a certain national consensus that we don't want to be occupied or bossed around by the Israelis. So the political settlement is what's needed. But for that to happen, there has to be widespread acceptance in Israel and the United States that the people of Lebanon should have the same rights as the people of Israel, and the Israelis and Americans have not reached that point yet.
Right. And Tom, final words. I mean, the only thing we have resembling some kind of political or diplomatic solution here is a push from some Western leaders, including the UK and Canada, really pushing and calling for talks right now. Is there a chance for diplomacy or a real political solution?
I think it's difficult to say. I mean, in past times, first, the White House, the U.S. was looked as, an option that could mediate between Israel and other parties. Obviously, that's not in play right now. And Europe, unfortunately, I think has been quite marginalized in terms of its influence to actually affect actions on the ground in the Middle East. This is very much a U.S. Israeli-driven project going on right now. I also agree that there, should be a lot of consideration to diplomatic maneuvers, but there seems to be just this feeling in both the U.S. and Israel that the time for talks is past, and now's the time for action. So I think that certainly, especially in Lebanon, where there has been a historic level of European foothold in terms of trying to move things in on the ground with past agreements that have succeeded, to varying degrees. Obviously, that can be debated today. Unfortunately, I don't see them as a major actor at this moment right now. I think this is very much between U.S. And Israel on one side and the axis of resistance and what's left of it on the other.
Tom, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for joining us, our viewers for being with us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media. Do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.